those is a discussion leader for the most part. I am going to follow. Do you have the PowerPoint slides loaded now?
Yes, so you can just tell me when to go.
The second slide is entitled Outline.
Yes, outline.
Okay, so let me quickly go through this so everybody knows what to expect. 6 main points that you gave me. First is the genesis of the NBA to Louisville movement. Second, our movement goals. Third, economic obstacles. Fourth, local impact. Fifth, U of L, friend or foe. And sixth, major challenges. So first, let me quickly go through the genesis of the NBA movement. This is actually, I think, realistically, the third incarnation of a grassroots effort to help bring the NBA to Louisville. The first happened immediately after the Kentucky Colonels were folded in 1976 by then-owner John Y. Brown Jr. Instead of paying the $3 million to enter the NBA, he decided it was more profitable to sell his best players. And at that time, he still had Artis Gilmore, Maurice Lucas, and Louis Dampier. And the season before, it sold Dan Issel. So he was able to get more money by breaking up the team than actually what he felt would be in value of entering the league at that point. He took the money he made from selling his players and he purchased the Buffalo Braves. 2 years later, he traded the Buffalo Braves straight up for the Boston Celtics. So by 1980, he was the owner of the Boston Celtics, and he had made a profit selling the Colonels, so I think he did a pretty good job from his own financial point of view. But it left the fans in Louisville and the rest of Kentucky without a team. So in 1970, the fans formed the Kentucky Booster Club, and they organized something called the NBA Six-Pack. It was a series of 6 exhibition games, preseason NBA games that went through Louisville during the 77-78 season to try to persuade other NBA owners that this was still a viable market for professional basketball. It was a success, but unfortunately the only team that considered moving during that time was the Buffalo Braves, after John Y. Brown Jr. traded them for the Boston Celtics. The Buffalo Braves' new owner, Donald Sterling, was from San Diego, and he took them to his hometown and renamed them the San Diego Clippers. 6 years after that, he wound up moving the team to LA, and that's the current Blake Griffin-led LA Clippers. So unfortunately, that was a very well-organized grassroots movement, but it didn't succeed in getting a team. Between 1978 and 1999, not much happened on the NBA front in Louisville. In 1999, the old Board of Aldermen, and that was the city council before the city-county merger of 2003. The Board of Aldermen commissioned J. Bruce Miller, a local attorney in Louisville, who had helped negotiate the Colonels' potential entry into the NBA as an attorney back in 1976. He was also a sports agent who represented Dan Issel, Greg Page, a local boxer, a heavyweight champion during the late 70s, early 80s. So he was very familiar with the sports business environment. But unfortunately, he was not able to persuade John Y. Brown Jr. to bring the Colonels into the NBA. But nonetheless, he became friends with David Stern during that time. David Stern at that time was not yet the commissioner. He was legal counsel of the NBA. The rest of the owners were a bunch of 60 and 70-year-old guys. Stern and Miller were a pair of 30-year-old guys, so they went out on the town, became drinking buddies in New York, and have maintained a friendship ever since. Due to this friendship, Louisville has actually got a much closer connection to the NBA offices than most cities pursuing teams. Now, in 1999, to get back to Louisville, the Board of Aldermen commissioned J. Bruce Miller under a $50,000 contract to go out and recruit an NBA team to relocate to Louisville. So he identified one team that was very interested in 1999. It was the Houston Rockets. The Rockets were having trouble. They couldn't get a new arena built in Houston. So they did consider leaving. Now, the chances of them actually relocating to Louisville probably pretty slim. More than likely, they used Louisville for leverage to get a new arena built in Houston, which is exactly what wound up happening. 1 year later, 2000, Michael Heisley, the owner of the Vancouver Grizzlies, could no longer take the losses in Vancouver, He was bleeding money up there because of a very poor Canadian dollar, US dollar exchange rate. He received permission from the NBA Board of Governors, which is the fancy word for the NBA owners, to move the team to somewhere in the US. It came down to Louisville and Memphis. And in fact, it looked like Louisville was going to land the team in March of 2001 to begin playing at Freedom Hall in September of that year while a new arena was under construction. Unfortunately, one of the local Louisville Board of Aldermen, then City Council members, let slip the details of the arena financing plan. At that point, it was still secret that Kentucky Fried Chicken had committed to spending $96 million over 20 years to name the arena the Bucket. When that news broke publicly, the people in Memphis went back to FedEx and their minority owner there, who was the CEO of AutoZone, the auto parts, the national auto parts chain, and they upped their offer to over $100 million. And Heisey wound up selecting the Grizzlies on, I think, March 21st, 2000. Wound up selecting Memphis as the new home for the Grizzlies on March 21st, 2001. But they weren't done yet. Later that same year, the Hornets were looking to move. I guess it was June of that year, they made contact with J. Bruce Miller, and they became interested in the Louisville market. And in fact, they actually signed a letter of intent and a memorandum of understanding to move the franchise to Louisville on September 15th, 2001, 4 days after September 11th. Unfortunately, it was predicated on Louisville coming up with an arena financing plan. Louisville was unable to do so, and in December of that year, the Hornets announced they were moving to New Orleans, beginning play in September of 2002. That 99 to 2001 effort, in addition to J. Bruce Miller, was also facilitated by a group called the Gateway Group, which was an organization, a grassroots organization of 44 small and mid-sized enterprises. So small companies less than, between $10 million and $100 million in sales, all located within Louisville that had committed to investing in advertising and season tickets. Unfortunately, when the Hornets decided on New Orleans, that group disbanded, and not much happened thereafter. Then in 2010, the Sacramento Kings made noises about moving from Sacramento to either Anaheim or Seattle, and that's when the third and present grassroots movement was born. And this is almost exclusively a social media movement, and I'm a part of that one. And if you go to the next slide, the slide entitled Facebook 5.
Yep. Albert, would you mind trying to speak up a bit louder?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Can you hear me now?
I think so.
I can try to turn up the volume too.
Well, let me hesitant to fiddle with my computer because I'm having some problems here. But I think this is as loud as we're going to get it.
Okay. Well, if you can't hear me, just interrupt me anytime and tell me to speak up.
You sound better now.
Okay. So on the next slide is called the Facebook 5.
Yes.
Okay, so these 5 guys, actually I've never met any of them face to face, but these 5 guys were high school and friends, and I think 2 of them went to U of L, a couple went to Moorhead, and one went to IUS. They were together one weekend, and they were talking about why Louisville doesn't have an NBA team. And they decided to start a Facebook page. And that Facebook page, for reasons no one knows, went viral, right? Nobody can tell what will go viral on social media and what won't. And within about 10 days, they had 7,000 followers. And this made the news in both Sacramento and Louisville. They got some press coverage on television, as well as in the Lexington Herald-Leader and the Courier-Journal. Now, at this point is kind of where I come in, as well as Phil Baker, one of the guys that runs the Facebook page on a daily basis. I had been working with J. Bruce Miller since 2006. Originally, I followed the Rockets, Grizzlies, and Hornets pursuits like everyone else did through the newspaper. However, in 2004, J. Bruce Miller wrote a book about the 3 failed pursuits for an NBA team. I was interested in the book. I bought a copy. I read it. I was fascinated by it. I wound up Googling J. Bruce Miller. I found his email address, and I sent him an email with some opinions, some ideas, and some questions. And he responded, and we kicked off an email correspondence. Since I don't live in Louisville anymore, whenever I was in town, I would stop by his office. And we wound up discussing different ways on what we could do to help promote the NBA to Louisville. In 2007, he had identified a potential investor in Hong Kong, and he needed some due diligence done. So instead of flying from Louisville to Hong Kong, at that time I was living in Tokyo, he asked if I would fly down from Japan to Hong Kong and meet with these folks, and I agreed to do that. Unfortunately, that deal didn't go through, but again, it helped strengthen this relationship I was developing with J. Bruce Miller. Now, to go back a little bit to me, if I could back up a little bit, I am a native Louisvillian. I moved to the city when I was 6. I went to Holy Trinity Elementary School, Ballard High School in UK. However, my parents were divorced. My mother lived in Louisville. My father lived in Miami, so I split my time between the two cities. School years in Louisville, winters and summers in Miami. But as I was telling Jeff earlier, I actually preferred Louisville because most of my friends were there, and I was a big basketball fan. During the 80s, both Kentucky and Louisville were at the top of their respective games in college basketball, so I grew quite fond of the city. So even when I left after graduating from UK in 1994, I still followed the city news quite closely. And I would try to get back once a year or so to visit my family. So even though my career wound up taking me to Hong Kong and China, Japan, and now Singapore, I'm still always kind of keeping my eye on what's happening in Louisville. And one thing that got me really interested in the NBA was the power of sports branding. It was 1998, and I was in Guangzhou, China, which is in the southern Cantonese prefecture. And a couple teenagers came up to me when I was, like I said, hiking in the mountains. They were probably 14 or 15 years old, could only speak a little bit of English, asked me where I was from. I said I was from Louisville, Kentucky. Of course, they didn't know where Louisville was. They weren't sure where Kentucky was until I explained Kentucky Fried Chicken. Then they understood, but they didn't know geographically where it was. So then one kid asked me, where is Louisville in relation to where Reggie Miller plays and Michael Jordan plays? And I found that to be a very powerful story of civic branding, that he knew Indianapolis because of Reggie Miller, and he knew Chicago because of Michael Jordan. And he could place those two cities. Using those two cities, he was trying to figure out in relation where Louisville was. So that kind of triggered my concept that sports could be a very powerful civic brander.
Absolutely.
So based on that, that's one of the reasons 8 years later in 2006, that I reached out to J. Bruce Miller. Now, getting back to that, the Facebook 5, when these 5 guys started this Facebook page, I had known through my work with J. Bruce Miller that David Stern is not happy when cities target specific teams. So he was not happy with the Bring the Sacramento Kings to Louisville Facebook page. So I reached out to these 5 guys and said, is there any way you could change it to Bring the NBA to Louisville, a more generic page? And they readily agreed to do that. Actually, I wasn't at that point so social media savvy, so I was very fortunate that 2 other guys volunteered to help out. So if you go to the next slide, the NBA to Louisville origination.
Not the movement goals. Oh, the origination.
Yeah, it says NBA to 2 origination. You'll see my name,
yes.
J. Bruce Miller, Nick Evans, right. So what we have here is first, J. Bruce Miller reached out to me, and then luckily there was a guy, Nick Evans, who runs a local website called straightpinky.com that covers local sports. He also hosts a Sunday morning sports radio talk show on ESPN 680 called the Sunday Morning Hangover. And he was really eager to get this topic into the mainstream of discussion, so he reached out to the Facebook guys at the same time. Also, a third guy, Phil Baker, who had gone to high school with one of the Facebook 5 guys, or known one of the Facebook 5 guys, and as a radio producer over at ESPN 680, he also wanted to get involved. So just by circumstance, the three of us kind of became involved with the original Facebook 5. Unfortunately, the Facebook 5 guys have kind of gone on and done other things. In fact, I think a couple of them are now active in the Make Louisville and MLS expansion city. They're going after the professional soccer city for the, or soccer club for the city.
Jumping from sport to sport then.
Yeah, they're jumping, but Nick, Phil, and myself, we're the three guys who kind of stuck it with the bring the NBA to Louisville social media stuff. But we're not alone. Any given day, we might have anywhere from 3 to 13 people helping us out in terms of posting stuff on Facebook or Twitter or helping us research stuff. And if you go to the next slide, that's what's allowed us to now grow to 10,636 followers. There you should see a screenshot of the Facebook page.
Which we do.
And you can see here the difficulty of creating virality. As I said earlier, in the first 10 days or so, the Facebook 5, the original guys, got 7,000 likes. In the 2 years since, we've only been able to generate about an additional 3,600.
Why do you think that's been such a challenge?
Well, I think probably two things. One is the nature of social media. Social media, there is no rhyme or reason, so whatever branding or marketing consultant you talk to, if they say they understand social media, they're full of shit. Nobody understands social media. Nobody understands why some things go viral, other things don't. We have no idea why 7,000 people like this concept in a span of 10 days in November, late November, early December 2010. Yet when we got 2 articles written in Forbes magazine, the digital version of Forbes, in December 2011, and then again in, December 2011, and then again in March 2012, we barely had any bump at all in likes.
And I remember those articles. One was written by Darren Heitner.
Actually, they were both written by Darren Heitner out of Miami, that's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we thought we were going to get a huge bump from that because maybe you well know in your field, Darren Heitner is quite well regarded. He's also a lecturer at IU.
Yeah, he's also going to be speaking at a conference coming up here, so it's definitely...
Well, tell him I said hello. He's interviewed me a couple times. But like I said, it's really difficult to imagine what's going to trigger social media. We put together some posts that we think are going to be dynamite, and we might get 20 likes. And we post something else we think is a throwaway post, just to get something into the timeline, and we get 75 likes. We posted a tweet after Kevin Ware broke his leg, and it went nuts. We had a reach of 37,000 people. So again, you just never know what's going to go viral, what's not. But with that said, there is a fundamental issue too, I think. And honestly speaking, the fundamental issue is we don't have a team. We don't even have a prospect for a team, really. All we're selling or all we're promoting is a vision. And I think that when you look at it in that perspective, that's the same problem Seattle is facing. Seattle, of course, the Sonics left there in 2004, but their Facebook page, Bring Back Our Sonics, only has about 13,000 likes. Even though they have a much more recent NBA history than we do. Actually, we don't have NBA history. We only have ABA history. So that would be the background of the social media movement. So why don't I pause there, and if anybody has some questions, here's a good time to ask about the social media or me.
Any social media questions?
Well, I mean, I was going to ask if the lack of success on social media was based on the fact that we haven't had a prospect of getting into the NBA team for a while, but he answered that, so.
So the question was more about whether or not the lack of success was just due to the fact that there has not been an NBA team, but I'm curious to know how much time people actually spend crafting branding strategy or social media strategy for your posts. I mean, is that really something that goes into the goals of your movement?
Yeah, actually, Phil Baker, who you might, I don't know if he's there or not, he's going to be one of the guys. He and I, you guys are going to think we're crazy. We put in 1 hour to 2 hours per day on this, and we don't get paid. And there are other people who contribute. If you look at the background image on the PowerPoint slide, to bring the NBA to Louisville, there's a very faint logo on the background. That was created pro bono by a local graphic designer. We've got some t-shirts that a local printing company designed. So actually there's quite a bit of time that goes into this. But to answer the question, I think that's a very legitimate question. Yeah, I think one reason it is difficult for us to gain traction is because, one, there is no team available right now. And younger people, perhaps everybody in this classroom is probably 22 years or younger, I would imagine. Realistically, in your lifetimes, it's difficult to remember that the Hornets and Grizzlies were both almost signed, sealed, and delivered to Louisville. And for older people, say, over that age, they're so disappointed that Louisville has failed just fumbled 3 golden opportunities well, 4 really, if you consider the Kentucky Colonels, the Buffalo Braves, the Vancouver Grizzlies, and the Charlotte Hornets. And of those 4, the Colonels were a difficult case because John Y. Brown Jr. made a financial decision. But the Buffalo Braves, the Vancouver Grizzlies, and the Charlotte Hornets were all but signed, sealed, and delivered, and local leadership fumbled. Especially the Hornets, as I said, they had actually signed a letter of intent on September 15th, 2011. And in fact, on September 19th, 2011, the KFC Young marketing team went up to New York, met with NBA marketing, and had uniform designs already approved. And the iconic uniform image was going to be the Kentucky Colonel's bow tie. Was going to be on the hips of the shorts, much like the Chicago Bulls have the Bulls logo on their shorts. The Kentucky logo on the shorts was going to be the Colonel's bow tie. So it had progressed that far. So older people of my generation are just sick and tired because it's the same old story. Louisville gets close, but then we fumble. And then for younger people, they don't have any tangible memory of Louisville ever actually being in the hunt. Now, with that said, that's what makes it even more remarkable that we've got 10,600 plus followers, and we're only 2,000 and change behind Seattle. And then no other city has more than a couple thousand.
I see.
Does that answer the question?
I believe so. We're getting a nod. Oh, we have a follow-up question. We've got several questions.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Okay,
Louisville,
fire away.
well, Louisville lately has been liking to brand itself as like the best college town in America. Do you think that focus on kind of like a smaller college market is having much of an impact?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Can you speak up a little louder?
Yeah. Louisville, as a city lately, has been branding itself as like the best college town in America. Do you think kind of that, I hesitate to say short-mindedness, is affecting, our ability to really have a concentrated effort to get a team?
No, great question, and I think it's very self-limiting. Why do we want to limit Louisville to being a college town when it's bigger than half a dozen other cities that already host professional sports teams? Yeah, I think that's an intentional self-limiting thought process.
So does that go to the psyche of the city of Louisville itself as opposed to anything else?
Well, I do think Louisville, more than many cities I've lived in, I've been fortunate, both because of my own career and then as a child, my father's career, to have moved around quite a bit. And I've lived domestically in Miami, New York, Louisville, and then abroad I've been lucky to live in 6 or 7 different countries. And I think one thing that strikes me about Louisville is the extreme polarity of the city. It's either you're Louisville or the rest of Kentucky. You're UK or you're U of L. There's no civic fabric that ties the entire state and region together. And I do think in many ways, a lot of U of L fans, not all of them by any means, because more than half of our team, more than half the 13 guys we work with on this Facebook project are U of L fans. But a lot of fans automatically see the NBA as competition. And I think what happens is we get into this mindset it's a zero-sum game instead of thinking of it as a variable-sum game. So instead of seeing it as hey, the NBA can come in and grow this pie bigger, many people in the city see an NBA team coming in and stealing the pie from Louisville, from the University of Louisville athletics program. So I do think that's built into the psyche of the city to some degree.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It's a great couple points about the difference in terms of it being a zero-sum game versus trying to grow the pie for everyone, and as well as the makeup of the city's mindset. Blake, did you have a question?
Go ahead. Well, can I follow up my own on that one?
Yeah, but one thing to keep in mind also is that we're limited to about 40 more minutes left. So,
Just one quick point is that people forget that from 1970 to 1976, the Colonels and Cardinals both shared Freedom Hall. And during that time, the Kentucky Colonels never finished lower than 5th in the ABA in attendance. In fact, those 6 years, they finished 3rd, 1st, 3rd, 2nd, 2nd, and 5th in the league in attendance. They also made the playoffs all 6 seasons, went to the ABA finals 3 of those seasons, and won the championship in '75. During that same time period, U of L outdrew the Kentucky Colonels actually on a per game basis, and also went to the NCAA tournament all 6 seasons, including 2 Final Fours in '72 and '75. And those were only the 2nd and 3rd Final Fours in the program's history then. They also set a school record for attendance in 1975, the Colonels' championship season. The Cardinals drew 13,674 fans per game, and the Colonels drew 8,727 fans per game. So they were both successful during that time. And even more interestingly, that was also the golden era of high school basketball in Louisville, with city schools producing championships left and right. Mayo, Ballard, Central, all claimed titles, and Shawnee, Elizabethtown, Shelby County, all finished as runner-up during that time. So I think that speaks, I'm not saying there's a cause and effect benefit there, but what I am saying is that does disprove to a degree that it's a zero-sum game, that only pros or college can be successful. Everybody can succeed at the same time based on history, and you're seeing the same thing happening now in Memphis. As the Grizzlies have turned into a playoff caliber team, the Memphis Tigers are setting attendance records year on year for the last 3 seasons. So it is possible for both to coexist.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm finished there, so follow-up question, go ahead.
I think I don't want to shortchange people who do have questions, so Blake and Marcus, if you guys can ask your question.
Yeah, Al, I completely agree with you wholeheartedly. I think one of the hot button topics that we've kind of, as a sports public around the city of Louisville, and discussing this issue has been the facility and the conflict of interest, so to speak, between the University of Louisville and an NBA team coming in. If you could maybe explain the pros and cons and components of having, say there was an NBA team that was available and got brought in, how would we find the facility if U of L is, not speaking anything negative about U of L, but if we can't come to terms on where they're going to play. So as far as give some background on the whole stadium, because I know there was a lot of back and forth thing about where possibly they could play, where the venue would be, and apparently Louisville's not having it.
Do you have slides dedicated to talking about the facilities issues and that revenue split issues?
No, I don't, because I was worried we were going to run out of time. And I don't want this to turn into an anti-U of L thing.
Well, and it's certainly, I don't think it's an anti-U of L thing. I think it's an economic interest thing. So I think it's an important element, given a finance
I can give a quick answer to that. So, one, it's a ridiculous argument that the college team and pro team can't share an arena and share revenues. 16 NBA teams share arenas with either an NHL team, another NBA team, or a Division I basketball program. If it can work in 16 other cities, why can't it work in Louisville? Secondly, Louisville only plays anywhere from 16 to 21 home basketball games per year over a 4-month period. In fact, over the past 3 seasons, they've only averaged between 1 and 2 home Friday or Saturday night games. So there are plenty of dates available for 2 teams to share an arena. And if you want an easy example, look no further than the Staples Center in LA that somehow manages to host the Lakers, the Clippers, the Kings, and the Grammys every year. So I don't think that's an issue. The issue is the lease. U of L has a strong lease, and they're under no legal obligation to change that lease. Unfortunately, the economic performance of the arena might dictate otherwise. But as pro-NBA as I am, here's my personal view on how I look at it. If I'm Tom Jurek, Tom Jurek was hired to look out for the best interests of the University of Louisville athletic program. And he's done that, and he's done that very well. And if the city has negotiated a poor lease, ultimately that responsibility lay at the city's feet. And until the city can come up with a solution, so for example, if the city can come to U of L and say, hey, look, we've got an ownership group interested in pitching the NBA on the 32nd expansion team in 2016. Would you be willing to renegotiate the lease? Until that happens, I don't see what U of L's motivation is to negotiate the lease. But once that came to be, for example, if J. Bruce Miller and the people working on bringing this to town, I think it could work financially. So if we quickly take a look, first the naming rights sponsor of the arena. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Yum Brands is of course a local company, and they've got a $13.5 million 10-year naming rights deal with a 10-year option to expend. So that comes out to 20 years, $27 million. That would come out to $1.35 million per year, which is the second wealthiest naming rights arena deal in the country for a university program. Only the Fresno State Save Mart Arena has a better naming rights deal than U of L. But with that said, in 2001, Kentucky Fried Chicken offered $96 million for 20 years, roughly $5 million per year. So based just on that comparison, Kentucky Fried Chicken saw 4 times more value in naming an arena with an NBA tenant than just a college tenant. And even more interesting is even though that deal was negotiated in 2000, if you look at the 2013-2014 NBA season, naming rights deal, that Louisville deal would still be the 6th wealthiest in the NBA. So that alone talks about the difference in terms of marketing reach NBA arena has versus a college arena. Now, secondly, if we look at the Kentucky Fried Chicken, the KFC Yum Center homepage, the homepage lists 8 cornerstone partners. These are the main corporate sponsors of the arena. The first one is the Golf House, the second one is Hilliard Lyons, the third one is Insight, the fourth one is the Kentucky Employers Mutual Insurance, 5th is LG&E, 6th is Norton Healthcare, 7 is Officeware, 8 is Stockyards Bank. The interesting thing about that is that 6 of those companies are headquartered in Louisville. The 7th, KEMI, Kentucky Employers Mutual Insurance, is from Lexington, and Officeware is from Bowling Green. So you see here that the multinationals that have a presence in Kentucky, UPS, Toyota, Ashland Oil, have not invested in the KFC Yum Center as a marketing tool because they don't see a national reach. In essence, the trade area of the KFC Yum Center, with only the University of Louisville as tenant, is the metro Louisville area. So that would be Jefferson County, Bullitt County, Shelby County, Oldham County, Trimble County in Kentucky, and then of course Clark County, Scott County, and what else over there in Indiana? I think it's 8 or 9 counties in total across the river, in Kentucky and across the river. So what I think we're talking about is what we call the trade area. The trade area or the marketing footprint of a University of Louisville tenanted arena is much smaller than the marketing footprint of an NBA arena. So based on that fact, there's money to be had for both an NBA team and a college team. The same way that the Staples Center shares revenue with their 3 tenants, the same way the Verizon Center shares their revenue between the Washington Wizards, the Washington Capitals, and the Georgetown Hoyas. So it definitely can be done.
Absolutely. Marcus, did you want to ask your question, or did you want to pass?
Yeah, it was just basically about the, like the origin of the team. Like he's talking about, I guess, taking a team from another city, but what about just the grassroots just growing a team?
What about just the creation of a new expansion franchise?
Yeah, actually, expansion is the goal. Right now, there doesn't look to be any relocation for 2 reasons. Number one, the NBA tends to frown on relocation. In fact, there have only been 8 relocations since the NBA-ABA merger in 1975 and 1976. And actually, one of those, or 2 of those relocations was the same team. The New Jersey Nets went from New Jersey to New York, or I'm sorry, from New York to New Jersey, back to New York. And other than that, there have been very few relocations. In fact, since in the last 20 years, the only relocations have been last year, the Nets went from Newark to Brooklyn, which is the same market. They just hopped across the 2 rivers up there. Then, of course, the Sonics. The Sonics went to Oklahoma, Seattle went to Oklahoma City in 2004. Before that was 2002 when the Hornets went to New Orleans. 2001 when Vancouver went to Memphis. Before that, you'd have to go all the way back to 1984 when or 85, the Kings went to Sacramento. 84, the Clippers went from San Diego to LA. And before that, the Buffalo Braves went to San Diego, which is also the same team. So there have been very few relocations. And currently, most NBA teams are pretty happy with their deals because cities are getting smarter and smarter. That whole idea that cities are going to leverage one city against another city for a new arena and then leave is a myth, because most cities now force teams to sign leases that include early lease penalty clauses in which the team that leaves has to pay off the remaining debt on the arena before they can move. So for example, if the Memphis Grizzlies want to move out of the FedEx Center next year, they have to pay off about $120 million. If the Atlanta Hawks wanted to move from the Phillips Center next year, I think there's still $90 million owed on that building. So teams just aren't going to move. The only teams that are possible would be Sacramento now. However, the NBA has done everything possible to keep them in town. As long as they can get that arena shovels in the ground this year, that team will stay. Milwaukee's lease expires after the 2016 season, and they don't have a new arena yet. There is now movement there to build a new arena in Milwaukee. However, taxpayers have a little bit of a sports fatigue up there because they spent quite a bit of money in Green Bay to renovate Lambeau Field. Then they built a brand new baseball stadium, Miller Park, for the Brewers. So there is some resistance towards using public funds to build another sports facility up there. But right now, the only possible team that looks like a potential target for relocation would be the Milwaukee Bucks. However, the more realistic scenario is that if the Bucks get a new arena, and if Sacramento gets a new arena, Seattle is left with an ownership group that's willing to spend $575 million for a team. That group has very deep pockets. It's led by a hedge fund manager from San Francisco named Chris Hansen, former CEO of Microsoft Steve Ballmer, and the Nordstrom brothers, of course, of the Nordstrom department store. So those 4 guys have a lot of money. They pulled it together. They've committed to spending $575 million on a team, plus investing up to $290 million of their own money towards a $490 million arena in downtown Seattle. So realistically, that could be the 31st team.
So now we're getting into dollars and cents and talking about financials. With the rest of the presentation, would you mind talking about economic impact or the debate? And I've moved this up to the market studies slide 11.
Okay, yeah, we'll quickly go through those. There have been 5 market studies since 2000, 2 by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Those were both commissioned by Greater Louisville Inc., the Chamber of Commerce. Studies 2 and 3 were independent studies, Rasher and Rasher, and I guess you probably know Professor Rasher, right? He's also in your field at the University of San Francisco.
Correct.
And then Street and Smith Sports Daily, they do an annual survey. So let's quickly, if you go to the next slide, what I've done is I've tried to distill it down into one key point from the executive summary.
Sure.
PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2000, the data clearly showed that Louisville has a population and corporate strength to support an NBA team. 2 thumbs up. Rasher and Rasher Sports Economists, the forecast for which cities are best for NBA expansion and relocation are shown in Table 6. Louisville and San Diego lead the list of potential candidates. I asked if Louisville was ranked number 1 of all potential relocation candidate cities. That was 2004. Street and Smith Daily does an annual survey. I'm using the 2011 data. That's the most recent data. I don't have a big budget, so I can't buy the new data, so I'm using the old data. The NBA could choose from a wide array of expansion possibilities, including such prominent candidates as Las Vegas, Louisville, Seattle, and Riverside, San Bernardino. Louisville is one of 22 candidate cities that scored 100% capacity index for an NBA franchise. Now, the next study was Cambridge Economic Research, and this was funded by U of L boosters. And it's been discredited somewhat because some folks, independent people who've taken a look at the methodology, believe that they had reached their conclusion before they'd done the research. And there's a really long explanation there that an NBA team would only have a $2.4 million annual economic impact, which is disputed by virtually every sports economist in the field. So that one it gave Louisville a thumbs down, but the credibility is in question. The last study was released in March. It was again conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers. This one was neutral, and it says Louisville has several potential relative strengths. Yet another potential NBA relocation markets could be more attractive to the league and or potential ownership group based on Kentucky's relative market size, particularly its corporate base. However, this one's been a little bit interesting because this study has never been released. GLI only released a 2-page executive summary, so we don't know what's in this study. So that's been a little bit unfortunate. Now, what I'd like to do is crunch the numbers a little bit. So if we go to the next slide, talks about obstacles, no local ownership. Right now, there is no local majority owner that's willing to pony up $500 million to either buy an expansion team or acquire an existing team. What we do have is we have 23 to 32 local minority owners who are willing to commit 7 figures or more each. But that still doesn't put us anywhere near $500 million, so we're still looking for a local majority owner. A majority owner. We don't have a local one, so what we do have is 3 to 5 potential out-of-town majority owners who are interested in the possibility of bringing an expansion team to Louisville if Seattle is granted an expansion team. If Seattle is granted a team, that will be the 31st team. It would only make sense to try to turn the league into 32 teams, 16 in each conference, 8 from each conference makes the playoffs. It would make scheduling and everything a lot easier. Now, second obstacle, Louisville is a very small market. If Seattle and Louisville join, you can see highlighted in yellow there, Seattle would be the 14th biggest market in the NBA today. Louisville would be the 27th, ranking ahead of only New Orleans, Memphis, and Oklahoma City.
Right.
If we look at the next slide, overall, in terms of the entire markets in the U.S., and in fact, this isn't exactly accurate, because I did add Toronto and Vancouver, even though they're not in the U.S., but they do have a connection to the NBA. If we look at overall market sizes, Louisville ranks only 41st. So that means there are 11 other cities between rank 31 and 40, or 10 other cities, that don't have franchises that are bigger than Louisville all told. However, if we analyze it in a different way, if we go all the way to the next one where it says obstacles, small market question mark, and then it says 16 and 24.
Yes.
Now, in the 2000 study, PricewaterhouseCoopers came up with an interesting theory that comparing absolute population figures is meaningless because it doesn't take into consideration the impact of other existing professional franchises and other leagues in those cities. So, for example, If you go back, I'm sorry, can we go back one slide,
Sure.
2 slides, where it says a small market, USA, number 41, and it lists New York at the top, then Los Angeles, Chicago.
Yep.
Of course, New York has a fantastic population number, right? 23,362,000 people in the CMA. But they split that up between 9 sports franchises. So that only comes out to 2.596 million population per franchise. When you look at it this way, it's a more accurate viewpoint of the market size in terms of how many franchises it can support. So if we go back to that next slide, small market, Louisville is number 16.
Yes.
When we look at it this way, you can see now that the number 1 market in the country is Los Angeles, because their population of 18 million plus is divided by only 6 professional franchises, which leaves over 3 million people in population per franchise. And it's interesting, if you go this way, you'll notice how many single franchise cities do really well with this population number. Number 2 is Portland. Number 3 is Orlando. Number 5 is Sacramento. Number 6 is Salt Lake City. Number 7 is San Antonio. Number 16 is Louisville. So now Louisville shoots up to the middle of NBA cities in terms of population per professional sports franchise.
What's been the reception of this theory that you're positing that was originally?
Well, actually, it's not my theory. The theory was developed by PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2000, the Dallas office of PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I can't take credit for the theory. All I did was crunch the numbers with 2012 market data.
Okay.
This has basically been ignored for the most part. I'll talk about that later. But even this is not completely an accurate picture because everything needs context, right? Context is a key thing. Population by itself means nothing without the context of how many existing franchises are in each city. So based on that, Street and Smith Sports Daily came up with another theory. If you look at another slide, the next slide, another challenge is per capita income.
Sure.
Unfortunately, the city of Louisville has a low per capita income. It's not the lowest in the NBA, but the last I checked, we're ranked 28. We're ranked ahead of only San Antonio and Miami in per capita income. However, one big advantage that Louisville has is we have a negative cost of living, meaning it's very cheap to live here. So that means people could afford tickets because the tickets would be cheaper. So one way Street and Smith tried to analyze this factor across cities was to come up with something called total personal income. And based on the advertising revenue, ticket sales, and television contracts generated by existing professional franchises, Street and Smith determined that in order to host a Major League Baseball franchise, a city must have a total personal income of $86.7 billion. NFL requires $33 billion, NHL 37.3 billion, NBA 36.4 billion, MLS 13.9 billion. Louisville's total personal income is $50 billion. So Louisville has plenty of capacity to host an NBA team or an NHL team or an NFL team, but not more than one of those franchises. The maximum Louisville could do is probably an NBA team and an MLS team. That would probably reach the maximum of a TPI in Louisville. So this was another way to look at the economic data. So based on both of these theories, first, population per professional sports franchise, and second, the absolute total personal income, and suddenly Louisville looks pretty strong with these numbers. Do we want to pause there for questions?
Are there any questions? We've got one in the back.
If we do get an NBA team, how would somebody go about for trying out for the mascot?
Somewhat of a self-interested question, considering he's the mascot of the Louisville basketball team.
Awesome. Actually, that would be that's not handled by the team directly. Generally, the cheerleaders, mascots, etc., are actually volunteers. And it's usually, for example, with the cheerleaders are usually doing that for 2 reasons. Number 1, the love of cheerleading, or number 2, because they're trying to break into modeling or acting or something like that. I'm not sure exactly who handles it, but generally it's like fan clubs or the community outreach program handles that. But I promise you, if we get an NBA team, you will get my email address after this. Email me and I'll find out who you need to contact.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Is there another question?
Um,
Not about
yeah,
mascotting?
so you said right now there wasn't really an option for an NBA team. So, if we couldn't get one here in a few years or so, would the option of having a D-League team be possible?
Would a D-League team be possible?
If possible, but we're not pursuing a D-League team. We think a population of 1.478 million deserves more than a D-League team. However, if anybody else wanted to organize a group and pursue that, we would support them, just like we're supporting the MLS guys.
Okay. What about more of the aspects of the economic impact of this of a franchise being here?
Yeah, actually, if you can jump ahead, I have one called Local Impact Hard Benefits.
I see it.
Well, the first, of course, number one, these are the 6 hard benefits. Number one is asset utilization. Of course, I think everybody must be familiar with the fact that the KFC Yum Center is financed primarily with the TIF district, right? The Tax Increment Financing District. Have you gone over that in your course?
We have not gotten to that yet, no.
Okay, so I can give you a quick explanation of the TIF district. Okay, so a TIF district is an area, a taxing district that's drawn around a new mega development, some type of infrastructure project, like an arena, a stadium, a performing arts center, a hotel, it can be anything. And what happens is the year before that facility opens, the state collects and calculates all the taxes, sales taxes, payroll taxes, and property taxes collected in that district during the year before the opening of the new mega construction project. Right? That's called the baseline. Right? So let's imagine that we've got Jeff's Bar right next to the arena. And Jeff's Bar does $100,000 in annual sales. Of that, he's got to pay 5% to the revenue cabinet in sales tax. So the state of Kentucky gets $5,000 from him. Sense so far? Right. Now, with the tax increment financing district, the year after the arena opened, wow, Jeff's business doubled. He now has $200,000 in sales. He still has to pay 5% in sales tax. So now Frankfurt gets $10,000 from him, $5,000 more than they got the year before. However, the revenue cabinet does not keep that $5,000. Instead, the $5,000 is refunded to the bond issuers. In this case, the bonds are issued by the Louisville Arena Authority, and they're backed by the city of Louisville. So in this case, the extra $5,000 that Jeff's Bar paid to the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet is refunded to the Louisville Arena Authority, who uses it to pay down the debt to the investors who bought their bonds. So it's imperative for a tax increment financing district to drive new revenue, new spending into that financing district to make the financing model work. Is that clear?
Anyone have any questions? Everyone seems to be clear to everybody.
Okay, so if you've been reading the newspaper, if you've been reading online news, you'll find that unfortunately the arena taxing district, the TIF district, is only producing 34% of projected revenues. That means there's a 66% shortfall in revenues. This is a problem. It doesn't matter if U of L sells out every men's game. It doesn't matter how many concerts come into that arena. It doesn't matter if U of L women draw 10,000 a game. There simply aren't enough dates of asset utilization of the KFC Yum Center right now to make the arena financing model work. So what we're expecting to see in the next year or so is the Louisville Arena Authority is going to have to go to Frankfurt and ask for state money to make up the difference in revenue. And we already know how poor Frankfurt is. The state of Kentucky is among the poorest states in the U.S. So it's a serious issue right now. So the big thing we see from an NBA team is bringing in 41 dates per year minimum If we use only the average NBA attendance number of 17,274 fans per game, you're bringing an additional 600 to 800,000 people per year into the TIF district spending money. And we believe those 600 to 800,000 fans would be enough to reduce that 66% shortfall in the TIF district.
I see. And so far, the authority and the city have been resistant to any sort of discussions about that?
Well, the authority wants to resist very much because the authority just wants to say everything is okay. And that makes sense for them to say that because the last thing the Louisville Arena Authority wants are nervous bondholders. So most of the bondholders, it's a bit complicated. Has anybody here taken, is this class familiar with fixed income or structured finance?
They're familiar, I think, basically with the concept of bonds, but I think they want to know who the bondholders are or some other finance terms.
Yeah, there are three tranches of bonds, right? The first tranche would be the safest bonds, and those are held by mostly U.S. investment banks and institutional investors. There's a second tranche of bonds, and there's a third tranche of bonds. The third tranche of bonds are held primarily by European banks, so they really don't know what's going on over here. And that's not so unusual. Large institutional investors are diversified around the world. They aren't watching every single investment with a keen eye. Instead, they're relying on what the credit rating agencies say. And unfortunately for the Louisville Arena Authority, both Standard & Poor's and Moody's, two of the three main credit ratings agencies in the world, have downgraded KFC Yum Center bonds to junk.
And why would they downgrade it to junk? What's the connotation with going from an AA or a B rating or an AB rating to a junk bond rating? What's the significance with that?
Well, one, they can no longer be refinanced because they're not investment grade. Once you go below BBB minus, the bond is no longer investment grade. And when it's not investment grade, there's no secondary market. And a refinancing on the secondary market would allow them to reduce the interest rates. And of course, this project was financed immediately after the Lehman shock global financial crisis. So for example, I have to confirm this, but I believe the third tranche of bonds is paying out 8.5%. And I hope anybody realizes that's an astronomical number on fixed income. So the hope was by refinancing that they could reduce by tens of billions of dollars the ultimate amount owed on this. Now keep in mind, the arena actually cost only $339 million to build. That's about $280 million to build the arena and another roughly $80 million to move the previous Louisville General Electric gas LG&E infrastructure that was there. But that $339 million is going to cost upwards of $700 million when you calculate interest in. So based on that, you can see where refinancing $20 million, $30 million here or there makes a difference. So number one, there's no ability to refinance. Number two, you could technically have investors start dumping these bonds onto the secondary market, which could cause all kinds of image problems in terms of other bondholders getting nervous and starting to dump their bonds as well. And eventually this could lead to bankruptcy if the Louisville Arena Authority cannot pay the bondholders. And that would be the biggest issue, would be a potential bankruptcy. And I think that's not likely, but it's not far-fetched either.
Interesting. So we only have about 8 minutes or so. Are there any more slides dealing with more of the financial impact and kind of numbers?
Yeah. Can we look at local impact hard minutes, number 3, the jock tax?
Absolutely.
And I think this is one that people misunderstand. Most people will say, hey, an NBA team only has 12 millionaires on it. And on average, 9 out of 12 NBA players live outside the city where their team is located. But that doesn't really matter because NBA players are actually taxed on a per game basis. So if Kobe's making $30 million this year, you divide that $30 million by 82 games. And he's actually making that in a check per game. And he actually pays taxes between 16 to 18 cities in the United States. Every city he plays in, he has to pay taxes. So for example,